The elegant woman sits frozen in her first-class seat, humiliation burning her cheeks as the flight attendant towers over her with a condescending smile. "Ma'am, we need this seat for another passenger." The phone in her trembling hand connects to her son's voicemail. Little does this crew know, they've just insulted Eleanor Johnson, mother of the airline's largest shareholder, Elijah Johnson. In 24 hours, none of them will have jobs. Before I dive into this shocking story of discrimination and justice, where are you watching from today? Hit that like button if you've ever witnessed unfair treatment on public transportation and subscribe to join our community fighting against injustice. Now, let's see how one woman's dignity led to an entire company's transformation. Eleanor Johnson was no stranger to discrimination. At 78 years old, the retired Birmingham, Alabama schoolteacher had lived through the civil rights movement, segregated water fountains, and a lifetime of being told she didn't belong. Her weathered hands told stories of determination, having graded thousands of papers during her 40-year teaching career at Westside Elementary. Despite her age, she carried herself with the same dignity and grace she had instilled in generations of students. Her son, Elijah Johnson, was her greatest pride. At 52, he had transformed from a boy who studied by candlelight when electricity was cut off to the billionaire CEO of Phoenix Technologies. Starting with a small software company in his garage, Elijah had built an empire that now employed over 10,000 people nationwide. His net worth exceeded $4 billion, making him one of the most successful black entrepreneurs in America. Despite his wealth, Elijah never forgot his roots. The annual trip to Martha's Vineyard with his mother had been their tradition for 15 years, ever since his company went public. Usually, he sent his private jet to bring her to New York, where they would fly together to Massachusetts. This year, however, an emergency board meeting had forced him to reschedule. "I'm so sorry, Mom," Elijah had said during their weekly Sunday call. "I can't send the jet this time, but I've booked you the best first-class seat on Meridian Airways. They've got those new reclining pods with complete privacy. You'll love it." Eleanor hadn't minded. "Son, I spent most of my life on Greyhound buses. First class on any airline is still luxury to me." What Eleanor didn't know was that Elijah's company had recently invested $200 million in Meridian Airways, becoming the airline's largest minority shareholder. The investment was part of Phoenix Technologies' diversification strategy, and Elijah had been impressed with Meridian's growth potential and commitment to customer service. On the morning of her flight, Eleanor arrived at Birmingham International Airport 3 hours early, dressed immaculately in a powder blue suit with matching shoes and her favorite pearl necklace, a gift from her late husband before he passed 15 years ago. She approached the premium check-in counter with her printed boarding pass and ID ready. The young gate agent, Lisa Parker, glanced up with a smile that quickly faltered when she saw Eleanor. "How can I help you?" she asked, her tone noticeably cooler. "Good morning," Eleanor replied warmly. "I'm checking in for the first-class flight to Martha's Vineyard." Lisa's eyebrows rose slightly. "First class? Let me see your boarding pass." Eleanor handed over her documents, maintaining her pleasant expression despite the agent's skepticism. "One moment, please." Lisa picked up her phone, turning slightly away as she called someone. "I have an unusual situation at check-in," she whispered, though Eleanor could still hear her. "Could you verify a first-class booking for Eleanor Johnson?" From across the premium check-in area, flight attendants Brandon Thompson and Meredith Wilson watched the interaction. Brandon, the lead flight attendant with 12 years at Meridian, nudged Meredith. $10 says she's in the wrong line," he muttered. Meredith nodded. "Probably confused. You know how they get." After several minutes of verification, during which other passengers were processed quickly, Lisa finally returned Eleanor's documents. "Everything seems to be in order, Mrs. Johnson. Though these premium seats are usually reserved for our regular customers." Eleanor simply smiled. "My son made the reservation. He said it would be comfortable." "I'm sure it will be," Lisa replied with artificial brightness. Boarding begins in 90 minutes at gate 12. As Eleanor walked away, she heard Lisa say to her colleague, probably her employer's ticket. Has to be. At the security checkpoint, Eleanor was pulled aside for random, additional screening while other passengers walked through. The TSA agent asked repeatedly if she had packed her own bag and if anyone had given her anything to carry. Throughout it all, Eleanor maintained her composure. She had experienced far worse in her lifetime. Still, a familiar heaviness settled in her chest, the weight of being perpetually seen as out of place. After clearing security and a brief rest at the gate, Eleanor was among the first group called to board. She made her way down the jet bridge, her carry-on rolling quietly behind her. The flight attendant at the aircraft door, Meredith Wilson, checked Eleanor's boarding pass and did a double-take. 1A. That's our premium first class. Yes, that's correct, Eleanor confirmed politely. Meredith's smile tightened. Right this way. The first-class cabin of Meridian Airways' flagship aircraft featured just 8 premium pods, arranged in 2 rows. Eleanor found her seat, 1A, a window position with maximum privacy, and settled in. The leather seat was buttery soft, with ample room and a large screen. Eleanor couldn't help but smile, thinking how far she'd come from the back of the bus in 1960s Alabama. A flight attendant offered her champagne, which she declined in favor of water. The flight is running about 30 minutes late, he informed her. We're waiting on a few VIP passengers. Eleanor nodded and took out her book, a biography of Harriet Tubman she'd been meaning to finish. As other first-class passengers boarded, she noticed their curious glances. A businessman in an expensive suit did a visible double-take when he saw her, then checked his own boarding pass as if concerned he might be in the wrong cabin. 40 minutes later, when the cabin was nearly full, a commotion at the entrance caught Eleanor's attention. A couple in their 60s entered, the man wearing a tailored navy suit and gold cufflinks, the woman draped in designer clothing and jewelry. Welcome aboard, Mr. and Mrs. Whitfield, Brandon Thompson greeted them effusively. Always a pleasure to have you with us. Charles Whitfield, the CEO of Atlantic Financial Group, nodded curtly. He and his wife Vanessa were regular first-class flyers on this route to their summer home. His eyes scanned the cabin, stopping abruptly when they landed on Eleanor. Brandon, he called to the flight attendant, beckoning him over. There seems to be a situation. Brandon leaned down as Charles whispered something, occasionally glancing toward Eleanor's seat. After a moment, Brandon straightened and approached Eleanor with a practiced smile. Excuse me, ma'am, he said, his voice professionally pleasant but with an underlying firmness. May I see your boarding pass again? Eleanor retrieved it from her purse and handed it over. Is there a problem? Brandon studied the pass longer than necessary. It appears there's been a computer error with our seating assignments. I'm afraid we'll need to move you to another section. Eleanor's heart sank, but her expression remained neutral. I don't understand. My boarding pass clearly shows seat 1A, and I've already settled in. Yes, well, Brandon's tone turned condescending, these premium seats are reserved for our platinum members, and there's been a mistake in the system. We have a nice seat for you in economy. By now, other first-class passengers were watching the interaction. Some looked uncomfortable, while others seemed smugly amused. I don't have platinum status, Eleanor acknowledged calmly, but my son purchased this specific seat, and my boarding pass confirms it. I'd prefer to stay where I was assigned. Brandon's smile tightened. Ma'am, I think you'd be more comfortable in the back with the other passengers. This section has certain expectations. The implication hung in the air, clear as day. Eleanor felt a familiar burn of humiliation but refused to show it. I'm quite comfortable right here, thank you. Unless there's a safety reason I need to move, I'd like to remain in my assigned seat. Charles Whitfield cleared his throat loudly. Some of us have connections to make. Can we get this sorted quickly? Brandon straightened. I'll need to call the gate agent. He moved to the cabin phone and spoke in hushed tones. Eleanor discreetly reached for her phone and called Elijah. The call went to voicemail. Elijah, honey, it's Mom. There's a little situation on the flight. Nothing serious, but if you could call me back before we take off, I'd appreciate it. Her voice betrayed none of the anxiety she felt. Moments later, Brandon returned with the gate supervisor and an airport security officer. Mrs. Johnson, I need you to gather your belongings. We can't delay the flight any longer. I don't understand why I specifically am being asked to move when I have a confirmed seat assignment, Eleanor said, her voice steady but firm. The gate supervisor, Patricia Miller, avoided eye contact. It's company policy that we can reassign seats as needed for balanced weight distribution and other operational considerations. From across the aisle, a white woman in her 40s, Diana Morris, spoke up. That's strange. I've flown first class on Meridian dozens of times and never heard of passengers being moved for weight distribution. Diana had already discreetly started recording the interaction on her phone, keeping it partially hidden behind her open laptop. Eleanor maintained her composure. I'm a paying customer with a confirmed seat assignment. Unless you can provide a valid reason why I specifically need to move, I'd prefer to stay where I am. Brandon's professional veneer cracked slightly. Look, these seats cost thousands of dollars and are intended for our premium customers. There's clearly been a mistake. Are you suggesting I can't afford this seat or don't belong here? Eleanor asked quietly. The question hung in the air, unanswerable without exposing the blatant discrimination at play. Security Officer Troy Baker stepped forward, hand resting casually on his belt near his taser. His presence alone was an implicit threat that wasn't lost on Eleanor. Ma'am, we need to resolve this situation, Troy said, his voice carrying the false patience of someone used to being obeyed without question. I understand you believe you have the right seat, but the crew has final authority on this aircraft. Eleanor maintained her dignity, pulling out her confirmation email on her phone. Officer, I have documentation showing this seat was purchased and confirmed. I'm simply asking why I'm being singled out when every other passenger remains undisturbed. Brandon interjected before Troy could examine the evidence. She's been disruptive since boarding, questioning our procedures and delaying departure. Eleanor's eyes widened slightly at the blatant lie, but she remained composed. That's simply not true. I've been sitting quietly reading my book until you approached me. Charles Whitfield, growing visibly impatient, raised his voice from across the cabin. For God's sake, can we handle this quickly? Some of us have important meetings to get to. Diana Morris continued recording discreetly while addressing the crew. I've been sitting here the whole time, and this woman has been nothing but polite. You're the ones causing a disruption. Troy shifted his weight, looking between Brandon and Eleanor. Ma'am, I don't want to escalate this situation, but if the flight crew has determined you need to change seats, you'll need to comply or deplane. Eleanor could feel the eyes of every passenger on her. The humiliation burned in her chest, a familiar feeling from decades of similar encounters. At 78, she wasn't physically equipped to be forcibly removed, nor did she want to create a scene that would only reinforce stereotypes about angry black women. With quiet dignity, she began gathering her belongings. Under protest, I'll move. But I want it noted that I'm being removed from a seat I legally purchased without any valid explanation. Diana stood up. I'm an attorney, and I want to give you my card. What's happening here isn't right. As Eleanor rose from her seat, Brandon quickly motioned to Charles and Vanessa Whitfield. Mr. and Mrs. Whitfield, we've resolved the seating issue. Would you prefer 1A or 1B? The brazenness of it left Eleanor momentarily speechless. Without waiting for her to fully collect her items, Troy took her carry-on and began moving toward economy class. This is the last call for immediate departure, the captain announced over the intercom. All crew, prepare for pushback. Diana followed Eleanor to economy, still recording. I'm documenting everything, she whispered. This is textbook discrimination. In economy, Brandon directed Eleanor to a middle seat in the last row, despite several empty window and aisle seats visible throughout the cabin. This is your new seat assignment, he said with barely disguised satisfaction. The passengers on either side of the middle seat, Nicole Bennett and Thomas Richards, looked up with surprise. This is ridiculous, Thomas said, standing up. Ma'am, would you prefer my aisle seat? I don't mind switching. Or my window, Nicole offered immediately. Eleanor thanked them but declined. You're very kind, but I won't displace anyone else. This situation isn't your responsibility to fix. As Troy and Brandon returned to the front of the aircraft, Eleanor finally managed to connect with Elijah just before the announcement to turn off electronic devices. Mom. Is everything okay? Elijah's concerned voice came through clearly. Everything's fine, honey, Eleanor said, not wanting to worry him. Just a small issue with seating. What kind of issue? Elijah pressed, knowing his mother's tendency to downplay problems. They moved me from first class to economy. It's nothing, really. I've flown economy my whole life until you got successful. She tried to keep her tone light. They did what? Elijah's voice sharpened. Why would they move you? They didn't give a clear reason, Eleanor admitted. But as soon as I moved, they gave my seat to another couple. Elijah was silent for a moment. Were they white, Mom? Eleanor hesitated. Yes, but, I need to go, Elijah cut in, his voice controlled but tight with anger. I'll call you when you land. Which airline is this again? Meridian Airways, but please don't make a fuss, I love you, Mom. Try to rest on the flight. I'll handle this. The line went dead as the flight attendant announced that all electronic devices needed to be switched to airplane mode. Eleanor closed her eyes briefly, sending up a silent prayer. Her son had a righteous temper when it came to injustice, something he'd inherited from his father. She hoped he wouldn't do anything rash. Would you have stood your ground in Eleanor's position, or would you have quietly moved to avoid conflict? Comment number 1 if you believe Eleanor should have refused to move no matter what, or number 2 if you think she made the right choice to avoid escalation. Don't forget to like this video if you've ever witnessed discrimination in public spaces. Subscribe to see how Eleanor's powerful CEO's son responds to this blatant disrespect of his mother. What do you think Elijah is about to do that will shake an entire airline to its core? In his corner office overlooking Manhattan's skyline, Elijah Johnson was in the middle of a crucial merger discussion when his assistant interrupted with a note, "Your mother called twice, marked urgent." Elijah immediately tensed. His mother never interrupted his work unless absolutely necessary. She understood the demands of his position and had always been his strongest supporter, even when he dropped out of college to launch his first startup. "Gentlemen, please excuse me for 5 minutes," he said to the room full of executives and lawyers. Family emergency. In the privacy of his adjoining conference room, Elijah returned his mother's call, his concern mounting with each ring. When she finally answered and explained the situation, he felt a familiar burn in his chest, the same rage he'd experienced as a child watching his mother endure similar indignities. He remembered vividly when he was 10 years old, shopping at an upscale department store. His mother, dressed impeccably as always, had been followed by security while white shoppers browsed unbothered. When she'd asked to see a watch from behind the glass case, the clerk had demanded to see her credit card first, a requirement not imposed on the white customer before her. "It's fine, Elijah," his mother had whispered then, just as she was doing now. "This is just how the world works sometimes." But Elijah had refused to accept that answer as a child, and he refused to accept it now as a billionaire CEO. After ending the call with his mother, Elijah sat motionless for 30 seconds, organizing his thoughts. Then he pressed the intercom. "Jessica, cancel the rest of today's meetings and get me Robert Campbell, CEO of Meridian Airways, on the line immediately. Then contact our legal team, I want them in my office within the hour. His assistant hesitated only briefly. The merger discussion can wait, Elijah finished firmly. This takes precedence. While waiting for the call to be connected, Elijah reviewed his company's recent investment in Meridian Airways. Phoenix Technologies had purchased a 20% stake in the airline just 3 months ago, a $200 million investment that had made headlines in the business world. Part of the agreement included 2 seats on Meridian's board and influence over company policy. Mr. Campbell on line 1, Jessica announced. Elijah took a deep breath before answering. Robert, this is Elijah Johnson. Elijah. What a pleasant surprise, Robert Campbell's voice was jovial. I was just looking at the quarterly projections for our partnership. The numbers look fantastic. I'm not calling about projections, Elijah said coolly. I'm calling about an incident that's happening right now on one of your flights from Birmingham to Martha's Vineyard. There was a pause. I'm not sure I'm familiar with. My 78-year-old mother was just forcibly removed from her first-class seat, a seat I personally purchased for her, and relocated to economy class. The crew gave her seat to a white couple without explanation. I'm sure there's been some misunderstanding, Robert began, his tone shifting to damage control. Sometimes operational decisions require, stop, Elijah cut him off. There's no misunderstanding. My mother was discriminated against by your staff because of her race. And in case you've forgotten, Phoenix Technologies now owns 20% of Meridian Airways. The silence on the other end was deafening. I had no idea the passenger was related to you, Robert finally managed. And that makes it acceptable? Elijah's voice remained level, but ice-cold. Would this treatment be appropriate for any passenger who had legitimately purchased a first-class ticket? Of course not, Robert backpedaled quickly. This is completely unacceptable if it happened as described. I'll launch an immediate investigation. Elijah interrupted. No, Robert. I want immediate action. I want the names of every employee involved in this incident, from the gate agents to the flight attendants to the security personnel. I want them removed from duty pending termination. Elijah, with all due respect, we need to follow proper protocols. With all due respect, Robert, you need to understand what's at stake here. Phoenix Technologies can call an emergency board meeting and vote to divest our entire position in your company by market open tomorrow. How do you think your stock price will respond to that, along with the public explanation of why we're pulling out? Robert's breathing was audible through the phone. I understand your anger, but you clearly don't, Elijah said. This isn't about anger. This is about accountability. My mother spent 40 years educating children, teaching them that character and hard work matter more than skin color. She deserves better than to be humiliated by your employees who assumed she didn't belong because of how she looks. I agree completely, Robert said quickly. Give me an hour to gather facts and take initial actions. I'll call you back personally. Make it 30 minutes, Elijah replied. And Robert? I'll be on a private jet to Martha's Vineyard within the hour. I suggest you be there when my mother's flight lands. After hanging up, Elijah called his pilot to prepare the company jet, then summoned his PR director and chief legal counsel. Within 15 minutes, his office was filled with his executive team as he outlined the situation. This isn't just about my mother, he explained. This is about a systemic problem that exists throughout corporate America. We're going to use this incident to force real change, not just at Meridian Airways, but across the industry. His legal counsel, Victoria Washington, nodded grimly. We have multiple grounds for action here: discrimination under Title II of the Civil Rights Act, breach of contract, infliction of emotional distress. And from a PR perspective, added communications director Marcus Wright, this could be positioned as either a disaster for Meridian or a transformative moment, depending on their response. Elijah's phone rang, Robert Campbell calling back in 20 minutes rather than 30. The flight is still in the air, Robert began without preamble, but I've already spoken with our operations center. The lead flight attendant claims your mother was disruptive, but I've reviewed the preliminary passenger manifest and seat assignments. There was no operational reason for her to be moved. So you acknowledge this was discriminatory treatment? Robert hesitated. Based on the information available, I cannot rule out that possibility. Not good enough, Elijah stated flatly. I want a public acknowledgement and immediate action. I've already dispatched our VP of Customer Experience to Martha's Vineyard on a corporate jet, Robert said. I'm flying there myself within the hour. We'll meet your mother's flight on arrival. And the employees involved? The flight attendants and gate staff have been suspended pending investigation. But Elijah, I can't fire people without due process. You can and you will, Elijah interrupted. Or Phoenix Technologies will sell every share of Meridian Airways stock at market open tomorrow, and I'll personally ensure that every business publication knows exactly why. After another tense conversation, Robert finally acquiesced. Elijah hung up and turned to his team. Book us on the next flight to Martha's Vineyard, he instructed. And prepare a press statement. If Meridian doesn't handle this appropriately, we'll handle it for them. As his team dispersed to execute his instructions, Elijah stood at his window overlooking the city. His thoughts returned to his childhood, watching his mother endure countless indignities with quiet dignity. She had always taught him to be better than those who mistreated him, to rise above and succeed despite the obstacles placed in his path. But she had also taught him to stand up for what was right. And today, he would ensure that those who had disrespected his mother would face consequences. While her son mobilized his considerable resources, Eleanor Johnson endured the 3-hour flight in her cramped middle seat. Her knees ached from the limited legroom, a stark contrast to the spacious pod she'd briefly occupied in first class. The padding was thin, and the seat barely reclined. For a woman of 78 with arthritis, it was physically painful. But Eleanor had endured worse discomfort in her lifetime. Growing up in Jim Crow, Alabama, she'd stood on segregated buses for hours rather than take a seat in the white section even when plenty were available. Physical discomfort was nothing compared to the indignity of being treated as less than human. The flight attendant seemed to deliberately avoid her section. When the beverage service finally reached her row, the attendant, a young woman named Sarah Collins who hadn't been involved in the initial confrontation, offered only a brief, uncomfortable smile. "Water, please," Eleanor requested politely. Sarah handed her a plastic cup with no ice, already moving to the next passenger. No snack was offered, though Eleanor noticed other economy passengers receiving them. About an hour into the flight, Diana Morris made her way back from first class and knelt beside Eleanor's row. "Mrs. Johnson, I wanted to check on you," she said quietly. "What happened up there was unacceptable." Eleanor smiled gently. "I appreciate your concern, dear, but I've experienced far worse in my lifetime." "That doesn't make it right," Diana insisted. "I've recorded everything, and I'd like to share the video with you. I'm an attorney with Morris & Associates, we specialize in civil rights cases." She discreetly passed Eleanor her business card. "My email is on there. I'll send you the video when we land." Eleanor accepted the card, tucking it into her purse. "Thank you for your kindness." Diana glanced toward the front of the plane. "Those people who took your seat, do you know who they are?" "I don't," Eleanor admitted. "Charles and Vanessa Whitfield," Diana explained. "He's the CEO of Atlantic Financial Group. They're treating the cabin crew like personal servants." The man demanded that Brandon warm his nuts at exactly 120 degrees. She rolled her eyes. Literally threw them back when they weren't warm enough. Despite everything, Eleanor couldn't suppress a small smile at the absurdity. "Brandon's providing them exceptional service," Diana continued. "Meanwhile, other first-class passengers are being ignored. Several people up there are upset about how you were treated." From across the aisle, Nicole Bennett leaned in. I couldn't help overhearing. Are you talking about what happened with this lady's seat? Because that was straight up wrong. Thomas Richards nodded in agreement. I travel weekly for business. Never seen anything like it. Eleanor appreciated their support but felt uncomfortable being the center of attention. Please don't trouble yourselves. I'll be fine. If you don't mind my asking, Nicole said gently, what brings you to Martha's Vineyard? Eleanor welcomed the change of subject. I'm visiting my son. We take a vacation there every summer. That sounds lovely, Nicole smiled. Is he meeting you at the airport? Usually he does, Eleanor explained. He's quite busy with work, but family has always been his priority. As the conversation continued, Eleanor found herself sharing stories from her teaching career and raising Elijah as a single mother after her husband's early death. Nicole and Thomas listened with genuine interest, occasionally sharing details of their own lives. I work in healthcare administration, Nicole explained. Traveling to a conference on patient advocacy. Investment banking, Thomas added. But my passion is mentoring youth in Chicago's South Side where I grew up. Their conversation was interrupted by sudden turbulence. The aircraft lurched, causing drinks to spill and overhead bins to rattle. The seatbelt sign illuminated with a sharp ding. Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing some unexpected turbulence, the captain announced. Please return to your seats and ensure your seatbelts are fastened. The plane dipped again, more violently this time. From the front of the aircraft came the sound of raised voices, Charles Whitfield demanding attention while Brandon attempted to calm him. Eleanor gripped the armrests, closing her eyes briefly in prayer. Nicole gently patted her hand. Not a fan of turbulence, she asked sympathetically. At my age, I prefer things steady and predictable, Eleanor admitted with a small smile. As the turbulence continued, several passengers began using their phones to record the Whitfields' increasingly entitled behavior. Charles was audibly complaining about the incompetent pilot, while Vanessa demanded another glass of champagne despite the seatbelt sign. By the time the turbulence subsided, word had spread throughout the cabin about Eleanor's situation. Passengers whispered among themselves, some casting sympathetic glances her way. My daughter works for Phoenix Technologies, one man several rows ahead mentioned to his seatmate, loud enough for others to hear. Their CEO is this amazing self-made guy who grew up poor in Alabama. Elijah Johnson. At the mention of her son's name, Eleanor kept her expression neutral, though her heart swelled with pride. Isn't he like a billionaire now? Someone else asked. Absolutely. Started coding in his mom's basement, built it into a tech empire. The whispers continued, though Eleanor gave no indication that they were discussing her son. She had never been one to name-drop or use Elijah's success for special treatment. Her philosophy had always been to stand on her own merits, something she had instilled in him from childhood. As the flight began its descent toward Martha's Vineyard, Eleanor felt a curious mixture of emotions. The humiliation of her treatment remained, but it was tempered by the kindness of strangers and the knowledge that she had raised a son who would never tolerate injustice. Brandon appeared briefly in economy class, his expression strained as he performed a final cabin check. His eyes skipped over Eleanor entirely, as if she were invisible. The plane touched down with a gentle bump, taxiing toward the terminal of the small island airport. As passengers prepared to deplane, an announcement came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Martha's Vineyard Airport. Local time is 2:45 p.m. with sunny skies and temperatures of 78 degrees. For deplaning, we ask that you remain seated until the aircraft has come to a complete stop at the gate. We'll be using both front and rear exits today. Eleanor gathered her belongings, wincing slightly as she stood on stiff legs. Nicole and Thomas waited patiently, ensuring she had everything before moving into the aisle. It was a pleasure meeting you, Mrs. Johnson, Nicole said warmly. I hope the rest of your vacation is peaceful, and far more respectful than this flight. Thomas nodded in agreement. If you need witness statements about what happened, many of us would be happy to provide them. Eleanor thanked them both, touched by their concern. As the deplaning process began, she steeled herself for the final indignity of having to walk past the first-class cabin where she should have been seated. But at least her ordeal was almost over. Soon she would be with Elijah, and this unpleasant experience would fade into memory like so many others before it. What she didn't know was that her son had arrived at Martha's Vineyard Airport 30 minutes earlier, and he had not come alone. The seatbelt sign dinged off, and passengers began the familiar ritual of standing too quickly, reaching for overhead bins, and forming an impatient queue in the narrow aisle. Eleanor, still in her middle seat at the back of the plane, remained seated. Years of experience had taught her there was no advantage to rushing. Folks in rows 20 through 30 may now deplane through the rear exit, a flight attendant announced. Eleanor gathered her belongings and joined the slow-moving line at the rear door. As she finally stepped onto the jet bridge, she felt the warm summer air of Martha's Vineyard, a welcome relief after the chilly cabin. The terminal was small but modern, with large windows overlooking the tarmac. Eleanor made her way toward the baggage claim area, her legs still stiff from the uncomfortable flight. She had only her carry-on, but the exit was in that direction. As she entered the main terminal, Eleanor stopped abruptly. Standing by the gate area was Elijah, her son's imposing 6'3" frame unmistakable even from a distance. He wasn't supposed to meet her until later at his island home. Something was wrong. Beside him stood a group of suited individuals with grim expressions. Eleanor recognized the tension in her son's jaw, the same expression he'd worn at his father's funeral and when he'd fought the bank trying to foreclose on their home during his teenage years. "Mom," Elijah called, striding toward her with purpose. Despite the serious situation, his face softened as he embraced her. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine, just a bit tired," she assured him, keeping her voice low. "Elijah, what are you doing here? And who are all these people?" Before he could answer, Diana Morris approached, her phone in hand. "Mrs. Johnson, I have the complete video. Would you like me to share it with your son?" Elijah nodded. "Please do." Other passengers began gathering around, many offering their contact information as witnesses. Nicole and Thomas introduced themselves to Elijah, explaining how they'd sat beside his mother. "The whole thing was disgraceful," Thomas said firmly. "Your mother handled it with incredible dignity." The commotion attracted attention throughout the small terminal. As first-class passengers began exiting the front of the aircraft, Charles and Vanessa Whitfield emerged, laughing about something. Their expressions froze when they spotted the gathering crowd, and Elijah Johnson at its center. Brandon and Meredith followed shortly after, chatting casually until they noticed the scene unfolding. Brandon's face paled visibly when he recognized Elijah. "Mr. Johnson," he stammered. "What a surprise to see you here." Elijah's gaze was glacial. "I bet it is." From across the terminal, a different group approached hurriedly. At its center was Robert Campbell, CEO of Meridian Airways, flanked by several executives looking equally concerned. "Elijah," Robert called, extending his hand, which Elijah pointedly ignored. "I came as soon as I heard. This is Patricia Lewis, our new diversity consultant, and James Howard, our head of customer experience." Eleanor placed a gentle hand on her son's arm. "Elijah, please don't make a scene." "I'm not making a scene, Mom," he replied, his voice controlled but carrying. "I'm ensuring accountability." By now, Troy Baker had also entered the terminal, preparing for his next security assignment. He froze when he saw the gathering, immediately recognizing the situation unfolding. Elijah addressed the growing crowd. "For those who don't know me, I'm Elijah Johnson, CEO of Phoenix Technologies. 3 months ago, my company invested $200 million in Meridian Airways, becoming their largest shareholder." Gasps and murmurs spread through the onlookers. Brandon's face drained of all remaining color. Today, my 78-year-old mother was forcibly removed from her first-class seat, a seat I personally purchased for her, and relegated to economy class, where she was then ignored by the cabin crew. When she asked why she was being moved, she received no valid explanation. Robert Campbell stepped forward. "Mr. Johnson, I want to assure you and everyone present that Meridian Airways does not condone discrimination in any form. We're launching a full investigation. The investigation is already complete," Elijah interrupted, gesturing to Diana. This passenger recorded the entire incident. Multiple witnesses have come forward. The facts are clear. Diana held up her phone. "I have Brandon Thompson stating, and I quote, 'These premium seats are intended for our premium customers,' while looking directly at Mrs. Johnson." The implication was unmistakable. Charles Whitfield attempted to slip away quietly with his wife, but Elijah noticed. "Mr. Whitfield," he called, stopping the man in his tracks. "I believe you and your wife benefited from my mother's removed seat. Did you request that she be moved?" Charles straightened defensively. "I simply mentioned to the flight attendant that there seemed to be some confusion with the seating arrangements. What happened after that was the airline's decision." Brandon, seeing his career crumbling before his eyes, made a desperate attempt to justify his actions. "Mrs. Johnson was becoming disruptive. I was following company protocol for handling difficult passengers." Several witnesses immediately objected. "That's a blatant lie," Diana stated firmly. "I have the entire interaction on video. Mrs. Johnson was nothing but polite and composed." Troy stepped forward, attempting to distance himself from the situation. "I was simply responding to a call from the cabin crew. I was told there was an unruly passenger refusing to comply with crew instructions." Elijah turned to face Troy directly. "So you didn't bother to assess the situation independently? You simply enforced what you were told without question?" Troy shifted uncomfortably. "My job is to support the flight crew's authority. Even when that authority is being abused." Elijah pressed. The terminal had grown silent, everyone watching the confrontation unfold. Camera phones recorded from every angle. This would be on social media within minutes. Robert Campbell, recognizing the escalating PR disaster, tried again. "Elijah, Mrs. Johnson, on behalf of Meridian Airways, I offer our sincerest apologies. This treatment was unacceptable, and there will be consequences." Elijah turned to his mother. "Mom, what do you think? Is an apology sufficient?" Eleanor, who had remained dignified and quiet throughout the exchange, finally spoke. "An apology is a start, but it doesn't address the underlying problem. This isn't about me, it's about a system that allowed this to happen in the first place." Meredith Wilson, who had been silent until now, suddenly stepped forward. "I want to say something." She looked nervous but determined. "What happened today was wrong. We were wrong. Mrs. Johnson was targeted because we didn't think she looked like she belonged in first class." Brandon shot her a betrayed look, but Meredith continued. "This isn't the first time. We have patterns. Unofficial practices. We make assumptions based on how people look." Robert Campbell looked stricken. "This is extremely concerning. I'd like to invite everyone to continue this discussion privately." "No," Elijah said firmly. "Discrimination thrives in privacy. This conversation needs to happen openly." By now, reporters from local island media had arrived, alerted by passengers' social media posts. Camera crews set up as the story unfolded in real time. Are you surprised by how quickly this situation escalated? Comment number 1 if you think Elijah's response is appropriate, or number 2 if you think he's overreacting. Don't forget to like this video if you believe corporations should be held accountable for discriminatory practices. Subscribe to see how this confrontation ends and what consequences await Brandon and the airline crew. Will justice be served, or will corporate power protect those responsible for Eleanor's humiliation? An hour later, the key participants gathered in the airport's VIP lounge, a small but elegant space typically reserved for private jet passengers. Eleanor sat beside Elijah on a plush leather sofa, looking tired but composed. Across from them, Robert Campbell and his executive team occupied the remaining seating, while Brandon, Meredith, and Troy stood uncomfortably near the wall. Diana Morris had been invited to attend as a witness, her phone with the incriminating video connected to the room's large display screen. Several other passengers who had witnessed the incident waited outside, having provided written statements. Eleanor had initially been reluctant to participate. "Elijah, this is becoming a spectacle," she had whispered to her son. "Maybe we should just let it go." Elijah had taken her hands in his. "Mom, you taught me never to let injustice stand unchallenged. This isn't just about today, it's about making sure this doesn't happen to someone else tomorrow." Now, as the meeting began, Robert Campbell attempted to take control of the narrative. "First, I want to reiterate our sincere apologies to Mrs. Johnson for her experience today. What happened was completely unacceptable and contrary to Meridian Airways' values of inclusivity and respect." Elijah's expression remained skeptical. "Are those values written down somewhere, Robert? Because your employees' actions suggest otherwise." "We have extensive anti-discrimination policies," Robert insisted. "All our staff undergo diversity training during onboarding." "Clearly, it's not effective," Elijah observed dryly. "Let's review exactly what happened today." Diana played the video, which began with Brandon approaching Eleanor in her first-class seat. The footage clearly showed Eleanor's polite responses contrasted with Brandon's increasingly condescending tone. When they reached the part where Brandon claimed Eleanor had been disruptive, gasps filled the room. "That's a blatant lie," Diana commented, pausing the video. "As you can see, Mrs. Johnson was calm and composed throughout." Brandon shifted uncomfortably. "The video doesn't show everything. There was context before this." "What context would justify lying about a passenger's behavior?" Elijah demanded. Brandon struggled to formulate a response. "Look, in my experience, certain passengers don't understand our premium service protocols." "Certain passengers?" Elijah interrupted sharply. "What exactly do you mean by that?" The room fell silent as Brandon realized his mistake. His attempt to defend himself had only exposed his prejudice more clearly. Meredith stepped forward. "I want to speak honestly. We have an unofficial understanding among some crew members about profile matching. We make assumptions about who belongs in which cabin based on how they look." Robert looked horrified. "This is the first I'm hearing about this." "With respect, sir, it happens throughout the industry," Meredith continued. "It's never in writing, never official. But we're encouraged to provide exceptional service to passengers who enhance our premium brand image. That's code, and everyone knows it." Outside the lounge, Charles and Vanessa Whitfield attempted to enter but were firmly turned away by security. "This is outrageous," Charles could be heard protesting. "I'm a platinum member." Inside, Troy attempted to distance himself from the situation. "I was simply responding to a request from the flight crew. Airport security doesn't make seating decisions." "But you chose to intimidate an elderly woman rather than question why she was being removed," Elijah pointed out. "You used your authority as a weapon." Patricia Lewis, the diversity consultant Robert had brought, spoke up for the first time. "What we're seeing here is textbook unconscious bias manifesting in discriminatory actions. The question is not just about individual accountability, but systemic change." Robert nodded eagerly, clearly hoping to redirect the conversation toward future improvements rather than current consequences. "Exactly why we've brought Patricia on board. We're committed to comprehensive reform, starting with terminations," Elijah interrupted flatly. "Brandon Thompson has demonstrated racial bias, lied about a passenger's behavior, and created a hostile environment. He cannot continue to represent your airline." Brandon protested immediately. You can't just fire me without due process. I have rights. You have the right to workplace protections against unfair dismissal, Diana pointed out. But discriminatory behavior is grounds for immediate termination under Meridian's own policies, page 37 of your employee handbook, which I reviewed before this meeting. What about Troy? Elijah continued. He used his position of authority to intimidate rather than protect. Troy stepped forward angrily. I was doing my job. You can't expect security to question every call we get from flight crews. Actually, that's exactly what we expect, Robert replied, apparently seeing an opportunity to demonstrate decisiveness. Security personnel are trained to de-escalate situations and make independent assessments, not automatically side with crew members. Eleanor, who had remained silent throughout most of the exchange, finally spoke. If I may. The room immediately quieted. I spent 40 years as an educator. When students misbehaved, I always had two options, punishment or teaching. Sometimes both were necessary. She looked directly at Brandon. What you did today was wrong. You humiliated me based on assumptions about who I am and where I belong. That hurt deeply. Brandon had the decency to look ashamed. However, Eleanor continued, firing everyone involved doesn't necessarily solve the underlying problem. Some people need consequences, yes. But others might need education and a chance to do better. Elijah looked at his mother with a mixture of pride and exasperation. Even now, she was thinking like a teacher. Mom, I appreciate your compassion, but there have to be consequences. I agree, Eleanor nodded. But consequences can take different forms. The young lady who admitted to the unofficial practices, Meredith, is it? She showed courage in telling the truth. That suggests she might be open to learning and change. Robert Campbell seized the opportunity. Mrs. Johnson makes an excellent point. Perhaps a more nuanced approach. Don't mistake my mother's compassion for weakness, Elijah warned. She's suggesting rehabilitation might be possible for some, not that there should be no consequences. Eleanor nodded. Brandon lied about my behavior to justify his discrimination. That shows a fundamental character issue that would be difficult to address through training alone. And Mr. Baker used his authority to intimidate rather than protect. Both actions suggest they shouldn't be in positions of power over others. Patricia Lewis nodded in agreement. From a diversity and inclusion perspective, discriminatory behavior exists on a spectrum. Some actions reflect deep-seated bias that's unlikely to change, while others might stem from environmental influences that can be addressed through education and policy reform. Robert turned to his legal counsel, who had been taking notes throughout the meeting. What are our options here? The attorney spoke carefully. Based on the video evidence and witness statements, we have clear grounds for termination of Mr. Thompson for violation of company anti-discrimination policies and falsification of customer behavior. Mr. Baker's case is similar, though he's not directly employed by Meridian but by airport security. Elijah leaned forward. Here's what's going to happen, Robert. Brandon and Troy will be terminated immediately. The supervisors who enabled this behavior will also be removed. Meredith will be placed on probation with mandatory training, given her willingness to acknowledge the problem. The gate agents will receive formal warnings and training. He continued, additionally, Meridian Airways will create a new executive position, Chief Diversity Officer, reporting directly to you, with real authority to implement change. Patricia seems qualified for that role. Robert looked taken aback by Elijah's directness. While I appreciate your input, these decisions ultimately rest with Meridian's leadership. Let me be clear, Elijah interrupted. Phoenix Technologies owns 20% of your company and has 2 board seats. If you reject these terms, I'll call an emergency board meeting tomorrow morning to discuss your leadership capabilities and our continued investment. The room fell silent as Robert processed the implicit threat. After a moment, he nodded. Your terms are acceptable. We'll begin implementation immediately. Outside the meeting room, a commotion could be heard. One of Robert's assistants entered quickly, looking concerned. "Sir, there's a situation developing. The video of the incident has gone viral on social media. Several news outlets are requesting statements. And Atlantic Financial Group has issued a press release placing Mr. Whitfield on administrative leave pending investigation of his involvement." Robert paled. "Contact our PR team immediately. We need to get ahead of this." Elijah stood. "Too late for that, Robert. The only way through this is with complete transparency and decisive action. My team will draft a joint statement for your approval within the hour." As the meeting concluded, Eleanor approached Brandon, who had been notified of his termination. The man couldn't meet her eyes. "I hope you learn from this," she said quietly. "Not just about keeping a job, but about seeing people for who they are, not what they look like." Brandon nodded silently, his career in tatters around him. Outside the lounge, Nicole and Thomas waited to check on Eleanor. "Is everything okay, Mrs. Johnson?" Nicole asked with genuine concern. Eleanor smiled tiredly. "Yes, dear. I think it will be." By the following morning, the story had exploded across traditional and social media platforms. #Meridian Racism was trending nationally, with the video of Eleanor's treatment viewed over 5 million times. News programs featured expert panels discussing corporate racism, with Eleanor's dignified response drawing widespread praise. In pre-market trading, Meridian Airways stock had plummeted 15%, representing hundreds of millions in lost market value. Financial analysts speculated about the long-term impact on the airline's reputation and bottom line. Atlantic Financial Group had moved swiftly to distance itself from Charles Whitfield, placing him on immediate leave the previous evening. By 9 a.m., a new press release announced his termination, citing behavior incompatible with our corporate values of respect and inclusion. Elijah and Eleanor watched the coverage from the comfort of his Martha's Vineyard estate, a sprawling oceanfront property with breathtaking views of the Atlantic. Eleanor sipped her morning tea, shaking her head at the magnitude of the response. "All this from one flight," she marveled. "In my day, this kind of treatment wouldn't have even made the local newspaper." Elijah squeezed her hand. "That's progress, Mom. Slow and insufficient, but progress nonetheless." His phone rang, Robert Campbell again, the fifth call since dawn. This time, Elijah answered. "I've been trying to reach you," Robert began, sounding exhausted. "We've finalized the action plan you requested. Patricia Lewis has accepted the position of Chief Diversity Officer, effective immediately. We'd like to present the complete plan to you and Mrs. Johnson this morning, if you're available." "We'll meet you at my office in town at 11, Elijah replied, giving no indication of whether he was satisfied with these developments. When they arrived at the small but elegant office Phoenix Technologies maintained in Vineyard Haven, Robert was already waiting with Patricia and a team from Meridian's executive leadership. Gone was the defensive posture of the previous day, now they projected earnest commitment to change. "Mrs. Johnson, Mr. Johnson, thank you for meeting with us," Robert began formally. "First, I want to reiterate our deepest apologies for yesterday's inexcusable incident." Patricia Lewis, a distinguished black woman in her 50s with decades of experience in corporate diversity initiatives, took over the presentation. "We've developed a comprehensive 5-point plan for immediate implementation across Meridian Airways." She outlined a program that included mandatory bias training for all customer-facing staff, revised seating policies that eliminated subjective decision-making, a diverse hiring initiative, an independent review board for passenger complaints, and quarterly audits of treatment metrics across demographic groups. Additionally, Patricia continued, "We've terminated Brandon Thompson, effective immediately. The security officer, Troy Baker, has been removed from airport duty by his employer. 3 supervisors who failed to properly oversee and train their teams have been demoted, and formal warnings have been issued to the gate agents involved. Robert added, Meredith Wilson has been placed on 60-day probation with mandatory training, after which her case will be reviewed. Her willingness to speak honestly about the unofficial practices helped us identify several other problematic behaviors within our organization. Eleanor listened thoughtfully before responding. Your plan addresses the mechanics of discrimination, which is important. But have you considered the human element? These aren't just policies being broken, they're people being hurt. Patricia nodded. You're absolutely right, Mrs. Johnson. That's why we're implementing a passenger dignity initiative as well. Every employee will spend time experiencing our service as different types of passengers would, including those with disabilities, elderly travelers, and people of various racial backgrounds. Eleanor smiled approvingly. As a teacher, I always found that experiential learning was most effective. You can't truly understand someone else's perspective until you've walked in their shoes, or in this case, sat in their seat. The meeting continued for another hour, with Elijah pressing for specific metrics and accountability measures. By the end, a comprehensive agreement had been reached, including Phoenix Technologies' continued investment in Meridian Airways contingent upon meeting diversity and inclusion benchmarks. As they prepared to leave, Robert hesitated, then addressed Eleanor directly. Mrs. Johnson, would you consider? That is, we would be honored if you would be willing to consult on our training program. Your perspective as an educator and your personal experience would be invaluable. Eleanor looked surprised. At my age? Especially at your age, Patricia interjected. Your wisdom and life experience can't be replicated by consultants with degrees but limited real-world understanding. Eleanor glanced at Elijah, who nodded encouragingly. I'll consider it, she replied. Send me a formal proposal, and we'll discuss it further. Outside the office, a small crowd of reporters had gathered, alerted to the high-profile meeting. Elijah stepped forward to make a brief statement. Meridian Airways has taken responsibility for yesterday's incident and is implementing comprehensive changes to ensure it never happens again. My mother and I are cautiously optimistic about these initiatives, and Phoenix Technologies will remain engaged to ensure accountability. A reporter called out, Mr. Johnson, are you satisfied with the terminations? Elijah considered his response carefully. Accountability is important, but my mother wisely pointed out that punishment without education doesn't create lasting change. What we're seeking is transformation, not just at Meridian Airways, but throughout corporate America. As they made their way to Elijah's waiting car, Eleanor noticed a familiar face across the street, Nicole Bennett, one of her seatmates from the flight. Mrs. Johnson. Nicole called, hurrying over. I just wanted to check on you. I've been following the news. Eleanor greeted her warmly. I'm doing well, thank you. And you? I thought you had a conference. I do, but I couldn't stop thinking about what happened, Nicole explained. I've started conversations within my own healthcare organization about how we treat patients of different backgrounds. Your dignity throughout that ordeal was inspiring. Thomas Richards appeared as well, having spotted them from a nearby cafe. Mrs. Johnson, Mr. Johnson, I'm glad I ran into you. After yesterday, I've committed to expanding my mentorship program for minority youth interested in finance. Sometimes it takes witnessing injustice firsthand to realize we need to do more. Eleanor beamed at them both. See, Elijah. This is how change happens, one person at a time, rippling outward. As they drove back to the estate, Elijah's phone buzzed with a news alert. He read it silently, then showed it to his mother. Diana Morris has filed a class action lawsuit against Meridian Airways on behalf of minority passengers who've experienced discrimination. She's cited our case as a catalyst but is pursuing broader systemic issues. Eleanor nodded thoughtfully. Different approaches for different aspects of the problem. Your corporate pressure, her legal pressure, and my educational approach, all necessary parts of the solution. Elijah smiled at his mother's wisdom. You know, Mom, you could have had a much more comfortable flight if you just mentioned you were Elijah Johnson's mother. Eleanor patted his hand. That's not who I am, son. I'm Eleanor Johnson first, your mother second. I've never wanted special treatment because of your success. I want respect because I'm a human being who deserves it, just like everyone else. As the day progressed, messages poured in from around the country, former students Eleanor had taught, colleagues from her teaching days, and even strangers moved by her story. What had begun as a humiliating experience was transforming into a platform for meaningful change. That evening, as they watched the sunset from Elijah's terrace, Eleanor reflected on the journey that had brought them here, from their humble beginnings in Birmingham to this moment of influence and impact. Your father would be so proud of you, she said softly. Not because of your wealth or success, but because of how you've used it. Elijah squeezed her hand. Everything I am began with what you taught me, Mom. Stand tall, work hard, and never let anyone make you feel small. Those lessons built Phoenix Technologies as surely as any business strategy. As darkness fell over Martha's Vineyard, mother and son sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge over the ocean, two generations united in the ongoing work of making America live up to its promise of equality for all. 6 months later, Eleanor Johnson once again found herself at Birmingham International Airport, preparing to board a flight to Martha's Vineyard. The winter holidays had passed, and she was joining Elijah for an early spring retreat at his island home. The difference in her experience was immediately apparent. The premium check-in agent greeted her warmly, without a hint of skepticism about her first-class status. The security screening proceeded efficiently and respectfully. Even the lounge attendant who checked her access made eye contact and smiled genuinely. Welcome, Mrs. Johnson. It's an honor to have you with us today. Eleanor thanked him but waved away the special attention. Please, treat me just like any other passenger. That's all I ever wanted. As she waited for boarding, Eleanor reviewed the quarterly progress report Patricia Lewis had sent her. In her role as special advisor to Meridian's diversity initiatives, Eleanor had provided invaluable perspective on the airline's transformation efforts. Employee satisfaction scores had improved significantly, customer complaints about discriminatory treatment had decreased by 67%, and the airline had received industry recognition for its innovative training programs. When boarding began, Eleanor found herself greeted by a diverse flight crew that included a young black female pilot, something that would have been unimaginable during her youth. The lead flight attendant, Miguel Rodriguez, recognized her immediately. Mrs. Johnson, welcome aboard. We're honored to have you flying with us today. Eleanor smiled warmly. Thank you, but please don't make a fuss. I'm just another passenger who happens to be an old teacher. Hardly just another passenger, Miguel replied respectfully. Your experience changed our entire company culture. Many of us owe our opportunities to your courage. The first-class cabin had been redesigned since her last flight, with greater privacy and comfort. As Eleanor settled into her seat, she noticed Patricia Lewis boarding as well, headed to Martha's Vineyard for Meridian's executive retreat where Eleanor would be the keynote speaker. Eleanor. Patricia greeted her with a warm hug. Looking forward to your address tomorrow. The entire executive team is eager to hear your thoughts on our 6-month progress. They chatted briefly before Patricia continued to her own seat. As other passengers boarded, several recognized Eleanor from the news coverage and offered quiet words of appreciation for her impact. The flight was nearly ready for departure when Eleanor spotted a familiar face in the terminal through her window, Brandon Thompson, the former flight attendant whose actions had sparked the entire controversy. He was working at the airport coffee shop, a significant step down from his previous career. Their eyes met briefly before he looked away, embarrassment evident in his expression. After takeoff, Eleanor found herself reflecting on the journey of the past 6 months. Beyond Meridian Airways, her experience had catalyzed broader conversations about corporate racism across America. Elijah had leveraged his influence in the business world to establish the Eleanor Johnson Initiative for Corporate Equality, a program that provided resources and guidance for companies seeking to address systemic discrimination. Diana Morris's class action lawsuit against Meridian had been settled with a substantial compensation fund for affected passengers and binding commitments to ongoing reforms. More importantly, it had prompted several other airlines to proactively review their own practices. Nicole Bennett had invited Eleanor to speak at her healthcare conference about patient dignity across racial lines, while Thomas Richards had expanded his mentorship program with funding from Phoenix Technologies. The ripple effects continued to spread outward, affecting countless lives. When the flight landed at Martha's Vineyard, Elijah was waiting at the gate as always. Their embrace was warm and unhurried, a mother and son whose bond had only strengthened through adversity. "How was the flight?" he asked, taking her carry-on. "Perfectly ordinary," Eleanor replied with satisfaction. "Exactly as it should be." They drove to Elijah's estate, catching up on family news and upcoming projects. The following morning, Eleanor dressed carefully for her keynote address at Meridian's corporate retreat, choosing a dignified navy suit that projected both authority and approachability. The venue was the island's Grand Hotel, its ballroom filled with airline executives, diversity officers from various companies, and media representatives. As Eleanor took the stage, the audience rose in a standing ovation that visibly moved her. "Please, sit down," she said with characteristic humility. "I'm just a retired schoolteacher who happened to be in the wrong seat at the right time." The audience laughed appreciatively as she began her address. "6 months ago, I experienced something that has been all too common for people who look like me, the assumption that I didn't belong in a place of privilege. What made my story unusual wasn't what happened, but the consequences that followed." She continued thoughtfully, "Most people who face discrimination don't have powerful children or viral videos to spark outrage. Their experiences remain private injuries, accumulated over lifetimes. The true measure of our progress isn't how we respond to high-profile incidents, but whether we create systems where such incidents become unthinkable." For the next 30 minutes, Eleanor shared insights from her teaching career about creating inclusive environments where everyone could thrive. She acknowledged Meridian's progress while challenging them to push further, punctuating her points with stories from her own life that brought both laughter and reflection. As she concluded, Eleanor offered a final thought: change doesn't happen through punishment alone, though accountability matters. Real transformation comes through persistent education, personal connection, and the courage to acknowledge uncomfortable truths. "I've spent my life in classrooms, and now, in my 70s, I find America itself is my classroom. We are all both teachers and students in the ongoing lesson of creating a more perfect union." The applause was thunderous as she left the stage. Robert Campbell presented her with Meridian's first Lifetime Achievement Award for Dignity and Equality, which would be given annually to individuals who advanced these values within the transportation industry. Later that afternoon, as Eleanor and Elijah walked along the beach near his home, she shared a surprising encounter from the event. "Brandon Thompson approached me afterward. He wanted to apologize in person." Elijah tensed. "What did he want?" "To make amends," Eleanor explained. "He's been working minimum wage jobs since his termination. But he's also been volunteering with a community organization that promotes racial reconciliation. He asked if I would consider supporting his application to Meridian's rehabilitation program for employees terminated for discriminatory behavior." "And will you?" Elijah asked, clearly skeptical. Eleanor nodded slowly. "I believe in second chances, son. Not without accountability, but with the opportunity to demonstrate genuine change. He seems to be doing the work." Elijah shook his head in amazement. "Your capacity for forgiveness has always humbled me, Mom." "Not forgiveness without justice," she corrected. "Forgiveness with transformation. There's a difference." As they continued their walk, Elijah shared news about Phoenix Technologies' latest initiative, a partnership with several major airlines to establish the industry's first executive pipeline specifically focused on bringing minorities into leadership positions. "The program will bear your name, Mom, if you'll allow it. The Eleanor Johnson Fellowship for Aviation Leadership." Eleanor's eyes misted. From not being allowed to keep my seat to helping others take their rightful places at the table. There's poetry in that. As the sun began to set over the ocean, Eleanor's phone rang. It was Patricia Lewis with exciting news. Meridian's board had unanimously approved their most ambitious diversity initiative yet, with full funding and executive support. None of this would have happened without you, Eleanor, Patricia said warmly. You've changed an entire industry. After ending the call, Eleanor gazed out at the horizon, reflecting on the journey of her life, from a little girl in segregated Birmingham who had to stand at the back of the bus to an influential voice for corporate equality whose name would be attached to programs creating opportunities for generations to come. You know what your father used to say, she told Elijah softly. Sometimes God puts you in the wrong place so you can help make it the right place for others. I think that's what happened on that flight 6 months ago. Elijah nodded, wrapping an arm around his mother's shoulders as they watched the waves roll gently onto the shore. The elegant woman who had once sat frozen in humiliation in a first-class seat was now helping reshape an entire industry, proving once again that dignity, persistence, and moral clarity could transform even the most entrenched systems of inequality. The most powerful classroom, Eleanor had often told her students, is the example you set when facing injustice. In that moment, watching the sun sink below the horizon with her son beside her, she knew her greatest teaching had occurred not in any school building, but in Seat 1A of a Meridian Airways flight, a lesson that continued to ripple outward, transforming lives far beyond anything she could have imagined. Eleanor Johnson's experience teaches us that confronting discrimination requires both accountability and education. While punitive measures like firing those responsible may create immediate consequences, true transformation happens through systemic change and education. As Eleanor demonstrated, dignity in the face of discrimination is not weakness but profound strength. The story shows how power and privilege operate invisibly until challenged. Brandon and his colleagues never imagined Eleanor was connected to someone influential, highlighting how many victims of discrimination lack such recourse. This underscores why institutions must have robust anti-discrimination policies that protect everyone, not just those with powerful connections. Perhaps most importantly, Eleanor's approach reminds us that justice isn't simply about punishment but about creating lasting change. Her willingness to consider rehabilitation for those genuinely seeking to improve themselves demonstrates wisdom gained through a lifetime of teaching. Some people need consequences, others need education, and many need both. In confronting racism, the goal must be transformation, not merely retribution. Eleanor's balance of accountability with compassion created ripple effects far beyond one airline, affecting entire industries and countless lives. Have you ever witnessed or experienced discrimination in a public setting? What did you do? Comment below with your own stories or thoughts on how you would have handled Eleanor's situation. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories about overcoming injustice. Share this video with someone who needs to understand the reality of everyday discrimination or someone who has the power to create change in their organization. Together, we can create a world where people are judged by their character, not the color of their skin. Thank you for joining us on this journey from injustice to transformation. Remember, sometimes the most powerful response to discrimination isn't anger, but dignified determination to create lasting change.